All right. Hello and welcome to another interview in the interview summit, You Are Enough. My name is Pia Pranamagrud and I'm your host for this summit. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by Veronica Monet, just like the French painter. We were just talking about, wow, it's such an exotic name. And the topic of Veronica's interview today is how to heal trauma and rise into the real you. And there's so much richness just in that name. So I'm anticipating that we're going to have really some very juicy conversations around this. But before that, I also just want to introduce Veronica, because Veronica is somebody that I've been following for many years, and many of you might also have come across her work because she's been featured in CNN, Fox, I think even also New York Times. So you've also really been out there and obviously sought after through being you're a certified sexologist, but you're also an anger specialist and relationship coach. And I think you've even created, let me see, you've created the exquisite partnership formula that you work with couples. So that there's all sorts of amazing things that you offer in the world. But today, out of all the things that you offer, you're going to be talking about shame and how to rise out of that into the real you. So without further ado, such a warm welcome, Veronica.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. And it's been such a pleasure getting to know you.
Yeah, and today is probably no different. We will just dig a little bit deeper. So
Absolutely.
I'd like to start with my signature question, and that is all about what is your personal self-worth journey or story?
Oh, wow. What a story it is. So I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible because this doesn't need to be about me. But I was born into a working class family. Working class, really at the low end, though. We actually lived. I grew up in a trailer. And so some people might say we were white trash. My mother hates it when I use that word. But however you look at that, my grandparents were transient fruit pickers. And my father was picking cotton when he was 8 years old. So then he became a welder, and my mother was a homemaker. So in some ways, it was kind of an ideal American family, except we were living in a trailer park. And that beginning was a little rough for me. It kind of felt like I had these very simple roots. There was a kind of a mythology in the family that we may not have much, but at least we love each other. And it's sweet, except it's also limiting. So my father was against education. He used to come along and fold my textbooks up and say, put that nonsense away. I have some real work for you. And he'd put a shovel or a rake in my hand. So I did eventually get to college, much to his consternation, because he thought that was a waste of money for women to go to school. And I had to defy, his authority in that respect. And I put myself through school. We were poor enough that I got grants and loans and all this stuff. But I'm going to tell you something. That home that I grew up in was a mixed bag. I felt very loved by my parents in a lot of ways, and they were very present. But my mother belonged to a very strange Christian cult, and my father hit my mother, and he sexually abused my sister and I. So this is a very rough start to life. And we can back up. I was in the hospital for a year, off and on for a year, in and out of the hospital from age 1 to age 2 until they figured out what was wrong with me. I almost died. So I had
One.
a lot of trauma. And then when I got to college, I was raped by a college student. And so there, that's part of my journey. When I got out of college, I worked in corporate America for like 7 years before I started working for myself. And first couple of years out of college, I was a flaming alcoholic and drug addict, severely addicted to cocaine.
Mm.
So I got sober. at the age of 25. And I went through 12-step recovery. Still am. I just celebrated 35 years clean and sober. Is that a
Wow,
lot?
that's
That's
such
a
a
lot to share, isn't it?
wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Well, the thing is that I'm a very joyful person. I have an attitude of gratitude, and on the other side of that, I got to develop this illustrious career. Now, your viewers might be a little shocked to find out why I was on CNN and Fox and in the New York Times. I was a high-end escort for 14 years while I was married and raising my stepchildren. So I had the traditional, I mean, white picket fence kind of life. Okay, there wasn't actually a white picket fence, but I lived in the suburbs, had a husband, was raising kids from toddler to teen. We were co-parenting with the mother and her husband. And I was all over television because I was very outspoken on behalf of sex worker rights. So yeah, I was on almost all the shows, and that was for 17 years. 17 years that I was doing television. I was married for 14 years of that.
Mm,
And this was during sobriety. This is after a college education, after 7 years in corporate America. So I'm a very independent person with my own unique path. And I'm not recommending my life to other people, but it works for me. And I help my clients find what works for them. I'm
mm,
always interested in what is the unique journey that we're all here to take.
mm. Now, appreciate, like, first of all, amazing, sober for 35 years. That's really amazing. So congratulations on that. And I say
I'm
that
very
with a lot of
grateful.
heart because I can only imagine the start, like you said, the start that you had, that you and your sister had is
Yeah,
so rough and
yeah.
must be filled with so much pain. And and what I wanted to ask, because of course, like the journey to healing, finding something, like you said, that unique path for every person. And like, for example, with the 12-step program, that's already such an incredible program. And like codependency is really born out of the 12-step program. So was it the 12-step program that was then the kind of where the healing started?
Well, I tell you, Pia, there is no way I could have even gotten sober if I hadn't first gotten to therapy. So I started a therapy group for incest survivors. And the counselor took me aside one day and she goes, "You really need to show up to these not drunk." I was like, well, how am I supposed to do therapy on this difficult topic if I haven't had a few drinks? Um, but so that was a few months before I got sober.
Hmm.
And I did therapy and 12 step. There's just no way I could have done it any other way. I needed as much support as I possibly could get.
Hmm.
So and not everybody has that need, but I really did have a lot of trauma. It's like, the hospital, they saved my life, but they're still, I had a kidney infection. They couldn't find it. So I was getting probed vaginally all the time by a staff of male doctors at the age of 1 to 2. This is very, very traumatic for my little body.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I want to say about trauma, Pia, is that trauma is not always because of something bad that happened to us. Those doctors saved my life. I wouldn't be talking to you right now if they hadn't probed me the way that they did. But it still created trauma. And here I am now, all these years later, still working with some of the trauma that's embedded in my tissues.
Hmm.
So we don't have to have a judgment about, is it good, is it bad, is it wrong, is it right. We can just look at it and say, has it left me in a place that's shut down and contracted?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you just said is so important because also in my work, very often when the word trauma is mentioned, it's like it's very, heavy word. It says, oh no, no, I haven't had trauma. You see people, veterans coming back from Afghanistan or Iraq or something like that, and they're traumatized because of something huge that's happened there, or in the case of some of the things that you've had to go through both as a child and as an adult. But there's also all the little things that happen. Let's say your little baby has to cry, is lying in the crib and crying just a little bit too long, and that weight is excruciating on that little body, right?
Well, you could actually make an argument that traveling through the birth canal is traumatic. Or just even if you were born by C-section, coming out of this warm amniotic fluid where you're floating and you don't get sore muscles or there's no hot or cold. It's just all the temperature is always perfect. And there's no bright light shining in your eyes, and there's not the sting of the oxygen going into your brand new little lungs. All of
You're
that's pretty
being held the
traumatic.
whole time.
And if you go through the birth canal, then your little head's getting squeezed. So yeah, life on this plane has lots of opportunities for us to feel traumatized. And we're all different. We don't all
Yeah.
have the same response to things. But one of the things you probably already know this, P, and I want to make sure that your viewers know, is that there's also trauma that's passed on from generation to generation in our DNA. And this is coming from the field of study called epigenetics. They actually did a study of white mice where they traumatized, and I'm sorry, this is animal experimentation. I'm not in favor of it. I'm actually a vegan, so it doesn't really sit well with me, but it's good to know these things. Um, the little mouse was traumatized from electrical shock whenever he smelled a cherry blossom. Then they took his sperm and impregnated some females with his sperm. The reason they didn't want him to mate with them is they don't know, well, behaviorally, will he be able to communicate something to the females that they would also communicate to the pups when they're born? So they just extract the sperm, and it's just DNA that's going to communicate the future for these little mice.
Mm.
Turns out and we're not just talking about the first generation, we're talking like the second and third generation, all traumatized to the smell of cherry blossoms. So what we have been able to assume based upon this scientific research is that if in your history somebody was raped or murdered, if in your history somebody suffered the concentration camps or the pogroms,
Mm.
if in your history there is any kind of trauma, you're actually walking around with that in your body,
Mm.
whether you know it or not. And so when we go to heal trauma, we're not just taking the journey on behalf of ourselves, we are taking it on behalf of the people that will come after us.
Mm. So important, obviously with all the listeners that have children. But I think what you're pointing to here as well is really important, because I'm sure many people can relate to the fact that they're walking around in the world, and it's like, there's something that you are deeply disturbed by or troubled by, or you feel like you're carrying something, and you can't make sense of it,
Yes.
right? And then actually, let's imagine that you're somebody who had the benefit of doing your work or doing deep healing work, and then this piece around epigenetics, for example, comes up.
Yeah.
And I even just look at myself, and my mother was sexually abused when she was 6, I think.
Oh,
And it's an area that I've really struggled with, and struggle with shame and things like that. And it's like, and I remember one therapist said, oh yeah, you've definitely been sexually abused. And I'm like, there's nothing that connects me with that. That's not my truth. But then of course, like, going back in time, and it was in this life, in my life, it wasn't previous generation, but it was my mother, and
right.
it made so much sense.
Yes, it does. Now, of course, in your situation, it's not just DNA. If you had been adopted, then we could say that's just DNA. but you've also got whatever subtle messages your mother might have communicated to you
Mm.
about sex, about men, about danger, about risk.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it travels. If you look at my family, my mother's side of the family has pedophilia. My father's side does. So these two wounded people who grow up in incestuous homes find each other and then carry that forward. My mother carried it forward by not having any ability to stand up against it and protect her children from it.
Mm.
And my father carried it forward by perpetrating in ways that he actually found really repugnant and would have never wanted to do. It was a shock to his system. But you don't get help for these things, you're almost doomed to re-perpetrate what was done to you. And if you don't, because some people don't get help, but then they're very reactive. So then they go the other way, whatever the other way is. And then that becomes that desire to protect your child from what was done to you becomes what traumatizes your child.
Yeah.
Um, so, so this is why we all owe it to ourselves and to all the people that we love to heal our traumas so that we can show up embodied, integrated, and non-reactive.
Mm. So, how would anybody listening, how would they know if they're traumatized? What are the
Well,
symptoms?
so yeah, if you're just looking for an official post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis, there's going to be a lot of people who don't have that. I'm not even convinced that I would have ever qualified to have a PTSD diagnosis. Although I think some people that I worked with in my early days of sobriety would have thought so. Because when I was working in an office environment, I remember one day somebody came up from behind me and just tapped me on the shoulder.
Mm.
And I spun around in a startle and was ready to hit them.
Mm.
This is, we're at work. It's not a combat zone. But so that would be one thing.
Mm.
If a fairly innocuous situation sets your heart beating really fast or causes you to shut down, here's a common pattern that a lot of people don't clue in and they check out.
Mm.
So somebody says or does something, something happens, and you lose a sense of time. You kind of, your mind wanders, you get a little numb. That's a trigger.
Yeah.
And that's a sign that you've been triggered into a trauma response. So your amygdala has 4 responses. And the amygdala is the reptilian part of the brain. This is the part of the brain that gets activated when there's threat. And it's not a very evolved part of the brain. That's why we call it reptilian. I don't know if you know very many lizards or snakes. I do. I used to keep them as pets, love them, but they're not very intelligent.
Mm.
So, so if you go back into that part of your brain, you don't have access to your prefrontal cortex anymore, which means you don't get to make reasoned, logical decisions. And you might actually do behaviors that are self-defeating. So here's the 4 things that your reptilian brain will allow you to do. Once you click into that part of the brain, you actually don't have a choice to do anything but one of these 4. One of them is fight. That's the part of me that was whipping around, ready to punch somebody just because they tapped on my shoulder. The other is flight. Okay, that's you're running away. You're trying to get away. You might avoid what the person's saying to you, change the topic, try to get out of the room as fast as you can, or literally run away. That's what it was intended to do, is help you run away from maybe a cougar or a bear. The other one, and this one's incredibly common with women, especially women who have been raped. So it's called the freeze response. There is a more entrenched version of the freeze response, which affects about 97% of the women who are raped, and it's called tonal immobility. This is where a woman who is being raped, and actually this can happen to men too, but it's only it's more well documented in women rape survivors, that they just froze. They couldn't talk, they couldn't think, and they could not fight. So, you know, that old way that they used to put the rape survivor on trial and ask her, did you fight back? Did you say no? Well, the vast majority of rape survivors never do. They freeze. and they freeze to a point that they actually can't move.
Mm.
And that's actually that's a survival mechanism. I know it doesn't sound like it. You might think running away or fighting would be a better, but not really. If the person who's attacking you has got a power advantage because they're bigger and stronger than you, freezing might actually save your life. If you fought back, something terrible could possibly happen to you. Not always. I'm not saying you shouldn't fight back. I've taken self-defense and I'm prepared to fight back if I think it's the wise thing to do. But that this brings up the thing, can I keep on line on my prefrontal cortex and not flip back into the reptilian brain? Because it's just going to tell me what to do. I won't get to decide at that point. Here's the fourth thing that the brain will tell you to do when it's under threat: fawning. Very few people talk about fawning. This is an important thing to know. This is where you are traumatized and triggered so that you're trying to ingratiate yourself to the person who's perpetrating. You tell them flattering things about themselves. Your focus is on trying to endear yourself to them so they won't hurt you. So, and sometimes that's a smart course of action.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't want to demonize these trauma responses, but we want to start having more executive functions so that we can decide. Now, how do we actually heal trauma so that we can stay online and make decisions for ourselves instead of the brain taking over? We have to work with the triggers, and there's some very tried and true ways to do that. And I don't know, Pia, are you familiar with van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score?
Love it. Love it.
Isn't it a great book? It was on, just for your viewers to know, this book was on the New York Times bestseller list for a long time. So, and that's kind of unusual because it's kind of dense in some ways because he goes into a lot of psychological research. But it's just for me really highlighted the fact that so many people have had trauma and really want to heal. And that kept his book up there on the New York Times bestseller list for months. So here's some of the things that van der Kolk itemizes as proven to work with trauma. One of them is EMDR. Some people call that rapid eye movement, but it can also, you can do something like this, and it's just bilateral stimulation that we're looking for here. And if you brought up a traumatic event and you were being able to do this, one of the things that it will help you do is start to have a relationship with that trauma that doesn't shoot you out of your body. It helps you stay present. And when you're present, you can start to heal things. One of the ways we don't heal things is we're not present. We can't remember the thing without getting triggered again and going into our triggered space. Another incredibly successful form of therapy is called IFS, internal family systems. So that was developed by Richard Schwartz. And that has a high incidence of success with people who are trauma survivors. In that, they work with the various different parts. And I've done that form of therapy, and I've also done the EMDR for my trauma. They're amazing. They're both incredibly amazing. Yoga, another thing that I do, yoga. Yoga helps you to start stretching your ligaments, and it helps you get into your breath. So something that's going to help you start stretching and breathing. You might be able to try some other things like Qigong or something like that. Meditation would be good. But one of the things that I like about yoga, and this is the one that van der Kolk also mentions in his book, and believe it or not, the US Department of Defense offers yoga training to veterans who come back and are suffering from PTSD. Because yoga has a proven track record of healing post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's good for other traumas as well that might not be as severe. And the thing is that I would recommend Kundalini yoga because that does gentle stretches, and it also really helps you start bringing up your breath and you're raising your Kundalini energy. Some yogas like hot yoga and things like that could kind of be a little bit of a checkout, or you might not be as present and you might not get as much healing.
Wow. like one of the ways that I've worked with quite a bit is something called biodynamic breath and trauma release. And that's
Yeah,
where we actually use the breath to activate the body to actually, so when you're startled, you know, for example, you have a
right.
trauma and it stays in the body. So with breath work, and I can only speak for this particular technique, is activating that part in the body so it can feel safe to release. And often, you know, the trembling or you know, movement of any energy actually, but one thing could be that the whole body is trembling, or it could be other ways that the body wants to move that stuck energy that's sitting in your cells.
Exactly. And that reminds me of one of the other things that is good for healing trauma too, which is like dance and theater, where people are in movement and they're emoting. They're bringing up emotions and they're moving. And also, you know, so 12-step recovery is actually good for trauma as well. Now, van der Kolk did not draw a straight line to that, but he talked about how healing it is for people who are suffering from trauma to be in groups where they can share without being shamed. And my
Mm,
experience of 35 years of being in
hallelujah.
various different 12-step groups, this is a great place to share about your trauma. And I used to go to 12-step groups for incest survivors.
Mm,
And just being in a room with other people who have suffered the same kind of trauma helps you feel human again and connected again. And it removes the shame. This is a fabulous way to heal shame, too.
mm. And I suppose any moment when you're sitting there at home or whatever, and sitting with your pain or whatever it is that you're experiencing, and dealing with anything on your own, is just going to keep that you know, perpetuating the shame, rather than being held in a safe space in a group like you're sharing, where it's okay, you say something and everyone's not going like that, but they can just be with you in that. They don't have to
One
agree, they don't have to have had the same experience, but just you expose, and the others can witness you in that and hold that for you. Oh.
one of the gifts that I give my clients in the shame-free zone is just that. First of all, I always tell them, I said, look, whatever you're going to tell me, good chance that I've actually lived through it. But if I haven't, I probably have had a client who has. So I'm real hard pressed to think at this point you would bring me something that I haven't already heard. And I've got a big container. I don't pretend to be open minded or broad minded. I really am so connected to people's hearts and souls that regardless of what it is they're going to confess to me, I see their humanity and I also see the part of their soul that's connected to the divine. So I'm
Mm,
holding them in that container and I want to help them hold themselves in those containers. And then the Schaefer zone isn't about co-signing dysfunctional abusive behavior. It's about healing those patterns.
mm,
But I just know we can't heal patterns if we happen to be doing something that's damaging and destructive. You can't heal that by shaming people. You can exile them, you can cancel them, but you can't heal them. And I'm on a mission to help people heal.
mm. And I don't know, I think not that I've really thought this through, but I just, with you know, I don't know, 20 years of receiving 20 years of therapy, you know, shame is so, it's everywhere. And 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 you know, in the context of this summit, you know, you are enough, it's like shame is the opposite of that. Because like you might be guilty for something, oh, I've done something wrong, but you know, shame of I am wrong goes against all that. So I wonder if you could speak to shame around this whole topic of you are enough.
I absolutely want to talk about that. Thank you for that, Pia. One of the things I want to say is I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown. She's kind of like the shame guru, if you will. And one of the
Mm,
things that she says, and I absolutely agree with her, is that empathy is the antidote to shame. So this is what I do with my clients. I give them empathy, and it's deep empathy. It's authentic empathy. It's not just like, oh, you poor thing, which is kind of more sympathy. Empathy is really feeling somebody else's pain and emotions in your own body. And we're all wired for that. We all have mirror neurons. Your dog and monkeys, mammals have the capacity for this, but some of us have been trained away from it. Some of us are shut down. And so we kind of have to learn how to tap back into that. The other thing that I add to the equation of healing shame is going a step further than Brene Brown does, and I introduce taking responsibility. I think that when we take responsibility for the things that we've done, we actually free ourselves of shame. So when I look at my life, any areas where I know that I've perpetrated, I've created harm, I want to promptly admit when I'm wrong. I want to take responsibility for the harm that I've created. I want to find ways to make amends. And I want to just very briefly touch on what's the difference between an amends and an apology. An apology kind of looks like this. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I feel so terrible. Oh, I feel so terrible. Oh, please, please, please forgive me. That's all about you. Um, and you are actually asking the person that you harmed to do emotional labor for you now. So an amends would look more like this. It's come to my attention that the thing that I did to you, that was really wrong. And I'm starting to see now the ways in which it harmed you. And I want to make myself available to hear how that's been for you. If there's anything that you want to say to me or share with me, I would like to be present for your pain. And I also want to take steps to try to rectify the damage that I created. So if, for instance, I stole something or I broke something, that's not difficult to figure out how you're going to pay for that or replace the item. But let's say you created emotional pain by something that you said or you did. Then one of the things that you can do is take steps to change that behavior. When I say take responsibility, I mean take responsibility for changing your bad behavior. An apology sometimes almost comes across as permission to do it again. But amends is where you actually say, okay, I got into anger management, or I'm taking this class, or I got into therapy. There's things that I'm actually doing, concrete steps that I'm taking that I'm not going to be that person anymore. That's what we call a living amends. I actually change who I am. And that's really important. So I'm actually really interested in this whole thing about moving away from cancel culture and moving to how we can use systems of restorative justice and also the amends process, people actually taking responsibility for their own shift in behavior so that they're no longer perpetrating as a hopeful way forward for all of us and to create healing.
I mean, even just as you were explaining the distinction, you know, when you started talking about amends, it was like this, I could feel sort of like this taking a big deep breath, and I could feel the difference just actually in my body as you explain that. And it's so beautiful, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing is that I've made amends for a lot of things in my life. Obviously, as an active alcoholic and addict, I created harm in my life, in the lives of other people. And even after I got sober, there was so much, you know, when you get sober, you're basically the age that you were when you start drinking, which means that at age 25, when I got sober, I was really the mental, emotional age of a 15-year-old. And I'm going to continue to harm people and hurt people. And so, you know, in 12 step, of course, we have a process where we're always taking our inventory and making amends. And my clients are not in 12-step recovery. I mean, some of them are, but most of them aren't. But I still really enjoy bringing that forward. And I notice that the whole concept of amends has kind of infiltrated the mainstream culture for people who aren't even in 12-step recovery. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because if you actually know that you're not that person anymore, it's really not that hard to admit that you did those things. You don't, you know, slump your shoulders and cast your eyes down in shame. You're like, yeah, I did that. I did that. And I'm a beautiful human being and I don't do that anymore. And that's a place of power. And that's really one of the things that I want people to know. When you move into a place of taking full responsibility for your perpetrations, and that's a word a lot of people go, oh, what does that mean? Well, look, hurting somebody's feelings, you could look at it, that as a perpetration. I don't usually apply that word there, but let's say you broke somebody's thing. Here's some behaviors people do that I consider perpetrations that are pretty average. Slamming doors, name calling, threatening a divorce, threatening to take the kids, um, um, stealing a little bit of money. Those are things that maybe good people do over the course of a lifetime. They create harm and they put us out of integrity. If you could go back and face those things and take responsibility for them, make amends wherever you need to, clean up your act and become a different person, oh my, it's gonna add probably an inch to your height.
Yeah, I felt myself kind of sitting up a little bit straighter now. It's like, yeah, that being in integrity and can look somebody in the eye again, that
Totally.
person perpetrated.
And you don't live in fear that somebody's gonna talk about something or find out about something, because you're in the shade-free zone.
Hmm. So, in the topic of this interview, rise into the real you, is this part of like reclaiming the real you when you start going back and going, well, these are some things that I did wrong. They're not who I am. And therefore, by making amends, I'm getting back into the place that of my sort of, I guess I can call innocence. So what,
Totally,
talk a little
totally,
bit more about that?
absolutely. So the thing is that the real you is that person that was in mommy's womb. That's the real you. You were just coming in my worldview. I'm not saying that your viewers have to ascribe to this, but I actually think that our spirit comes from somewhere else, and you're pure, you're beautiful, and you got a lot to learn. That's why you're here. You came here to learn, and so you're going to make mistakes. If you don't make mistakes, you won't learn anything. And some of those mistakes might be big, and some of them might be small, and some of them might be devastating. And the thing is that it's good to have remorse. It's good to have guilt. That lets you know that you have a conscience. That lets you know you betrayed the real you. You stepped out of your integrity. You're not being the real you anymore.
Mm,
Um, but shame is where you start actually thinking that the things that you did and the things that were done to you define who you are, and they don't. You're not what you did, and you're not what was done to you.
mm,
You're actually way bigger than that, much
mm,
more pure than that. So you want to get reoriented. And this is, another thing, controversial topic, but I think it's worth mentioning because it's mentioned in Van der Kolk's book. Some people actually take plant-based plant medicine journeys to get reacquainted with who they truly are.
mm,
Because we all need to know that that's the guiding light. You've got to have some sense of your inner innocence. And
mm,
when you can reconnect, I take my clients a lot of times, I ask them to get a picture of themselves when they're about 3 or 4 years old, or maybe right around the time that something bad was done to them, just get that picture of themselves. I have a picture of myself that was taken right around the time my father first perpetrated against me, and I'm about 6. And I see that picture every morning when I wake up and every night when I go to bed, and I love on her. I love on her because I know that she is innocent, and that
mm,
that's my core essence.
mm,
So yeah, I'm really passionate about getting us reconnected to our innocence. And here's the irony of it. Life is full of ironies. If you really want to get connected to your core innocence, take a deep dive into your perpetrations, fully admit to them, make an amends for them, and step into who you truly are.
mm. Wow. Yeah, it's I didn't see that coming, that that's part of healing, but of course I can connect with the piece around coming back into integrity. But I suppose everything that you've ever done that we can call a perpetration, somehow you're carrying it somewhere, right?
You
It's with you.
are.
It's not like it goes
Well,
away.
look, you could go to a whole bunch of metaphysical, self-help, whatever, you're great, and have just repeat a bunch of affirmations about how wonderful you are, but somewhere in the back of your mind, you're going to remember that time that you told your mom go to hell, or that time that you shoplifted something, or that time that maybe you got angry at your child and shook them. Those things are going to weigh heavy in the back of your mind. You may try to excuse them, but what it does is it drives a wedge between you and you. You're not fully integrated. You're not fully connected to yourself. You're showing that you're incapable of loving all of you. One of the things about coming to grips with those things that you've considered dark about yourself and about your past is that you get to show up and love all of it. Love all of it. Don't try to minimize it or deny it. Face it head on and love all of you.
And is this how you is this your view of how we rise above our shame?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
It is. Because I look, I don't live in a place of shame. I don't. And I've made lots of mistakes. Just to be able to tell you that I'm a former drug addict and alcoholic. I did so much drunk driving. I just, every day, I'm like, thank you, thank you, thank you that I didn't kill anybody. I could have easily. So if I meet somebody who has killed somebody from drunk driving, I don't judge them. I just think, oh, that poor person. I'm so sorry that they're having to deal with that, and how grateful I am that that isn't one of the things that I have to deal with. But I have other things that I get to look at, including the fact that I was in a domestic violence marriage for a while until we got well. We both went through a lot of recovery to get to the other side where we weren't hurting each other anymore. But there was violence in our marriage, and I love myself. I do. And my ex-husband and I are still very good friends. And we talk about the violence that was in our marriage and how the journey that we had about overcoming that and getting well from that and healing from that, and how we helped each other to heal from that. And we laugh. We laugh about that pain now. It wasn't funny when it was happening, and it would not be funny if it was still happening. But when it's in the rearview mirror and you know that that's not who you are anymore, that there's no way you would ever behave that way anymore because you're in recovery around it, you can laugh about it.
But what I think is so beautiful about what you just shared is that you did that journey together. So although you're not together anymore, but each of you kind of traveled together, like almost like holding hands through that process that you both needed to go through to heal, to have that partnership, to be able to do that, both be perpetrators, but then also the journey of healing together.
And if we had decided that one of us was bad and one of us is the victim and one of us is the perpetrator, then neither one of us would really be healed. I mean, coming to grips with how we were both perpetrating and we were both being victimized, that was an incredibly eye-opening experience. And I'm not saying that that's true in all domestic violence situations. There are domestic violence situations where there is just a perpetrator and a victim. But I still, when I'm working with couples who have that problem, and I do, I don't demonize or polarize. I'm looking at the innocence that resides in both those people, and I'm looking for how to teach them healthy boundaries and how to have bright lines. So the bright lines that I have when I'm walking a couple through recovery around domestic violence is that we will not do any name calling, and we will not even slam doors. If you think it's okay to name call and slam doors, you're just that much closer to doing worse things.
Now, I'm afraid that we're at our time here, and I know there's so much to be said around this topic. And you've shared there's so many insights and so many nuggets here for everyone listening. And I guess one final thing, aside from everything that you've shared, I wonder, is there something, imagine that somebody's listening who doesn't have a Pia or a Veronica, or and they're in a situation where they're really really in their shame bubble, you know. What are some, like shame 101, what is maybe one or two things that somebody can do, like very simply on a daily basis, to take those first few steps?
Get a picture of yourself before you were harmed. And I'm saying that because almost everybody who's got a shame burden was harmed in some way. Now, maybe it was you were bullied by somebody at school,
Mm,
or maybe you had a parent that was abusive in some way.
mm,
Or maybe somebody died, you know, a parent or that died in your life, or even a pet died. I don't know, but usually there's something that happens that starts to create that shame. Unfortunately, as children, we think everything that happens is our fault. So
mm,
if you get a picture of that little guy or gal that you were, and you can put it up on your bathroom mirror, you can put it on the rearview mirror of your car, you can put it at your bedside, you can carry it in your wallet, whatever feels good to you. But I want you to reacquaint yourself with the innocence and beauty of that
mm,
child,
mm,
because that's what you've forgotten.
mm. I love that so much. You know, that I think if anything, that's, now that you say those things, it's probably my deepest yearning to like be inside of that innocence again. We see it in little children that, you know, and it's so, so endearing. And to get back there is,
Yeah. And, you know, just as a postscript to that, look, for the first 9 months that I was looking at this picture of myself, I pretty much hated her. I thought she was
mm,
an ugly little kid. And I just,
mm,
so if that's your first response, that's okay. That's what you're working with.
yeah,
And somebody told you to hate that little kid. And one thing that can also help sometimes is just look up kids that age online, and you're going to have a hard time hating them. You will feel more empathy for them.
mm,
Um, and you can start to see the contrast between the way you feel about the you of that age and how you feel about somebody else of that age. And you can start to get a reality check of the fallacies upon which you're operating, that there
yeah,
was something wrong with this child, and therefore whatever happened to him or her was something that they brought on or deserved.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So
What
you're
a,
enough.
mm,
You're enough. You're
mm,
beautiful. You're on a journey. You're supposed to make mistakes. We do not deny our mistakes. We learn from them. We benefit from them, and we grow.
mm. What a wonderful, wonderful way to conclude our very rich and nourishing time together.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
before we finish, I'd like to, for you, Veronica, just to let our listeners know, where can they find you? Because of course, I know you have so much richness, more that you can share with them.
Absolutely. Well, you could just Google the word the shame free zone, and it'll bring up my website. It'll bring up my blog. It'll bring up my YouTube. Probably my Facebook too. If you go to shamefreezone.com/subscribe, I have a free gift for you. And the free gift consists of a 10,000 word full color ebook. This thing was very expensive to put together, and it's chock full of a lot of tips. It's called the Exquisite Partnership Formula. But you don't have to be in a partnership to benefit from this. There's a lot in there about how to communicate with other human beings. So if you have any people in your life, you want to learn about this. Not sure
Oh,
the dog will relate to it, but maybe I have a dog. And sometimes I use it on her. So,
mm,
and you'll also get access to my 3 top podcasts. So, um, I'm excited to share that with your viewers.
That's so generous of you, both not just being here with us today, but also offering such a valuable resource that I'm sure so many of our listeners would really, really benefit so much from. So again, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure these days getting to know you and then having this interview today. And go be well. And for everybody else, be well and see you in the next interview.
Thank you,
Bye
Pierre.
for now. Thank you.